All right, I know I am standing between you, a snack, and a bathroom break, so we're going to try to move through this fairly energetically, so work with me here. As Steve said, my name's Frieda. I work at the Minnesota Department of Health, and I'm really delighted to be here at this conference again. I was at the Champaign conference a couple years ago and have learned so much and developed a lot of partnerships through the conference as well. And this has been a privilege to work on this project specifically because it's been a very collaborative project, both with the private well class and then the Association of Public Health Laboratories. So we will just kind of start moving through this. So this is kind of a funny slide to put up at this conference, but just a reminder, in the United States, we have about 43 million people who get their drinking water from a private well. And I only point that out because, as we know, even if all of us tried to reach all these 43 million people, we wouldn't be particularly successful in doing that. The key to reaching private well users is through partnerships. And especially when I'm giving this presentation to outside audiences, that reminder that there are private well users all around us. About 1 in 8 people in the United States get their drinking water from a private well. That's pretty substantial. So in Minnesota, one of the acronyms we try to encourage private well users to remember their responsibilities is the acronym TIPS. We encourage them to regularly test their well water, inspect their wells, protect their wells, and then seal them when they are no longer in use. And as Steve alluded to, in 2016, we conducted a survey with about 798 households in Minnesota that get their drinking water from a private well and had elevated levels of arsenic, so levels of arsenic above what's allowed in a public drinking water system. And through that survey, we have based a lot of our outreach and our education approaches on the results of that survey. And I want to highlight here that I'm going to talk about some of the results that we found in Minnesota and how that guided our research, but this is a growing body of research as a whole. So there are many states and entities that have done some similar studies that align with some of our findings as well. So just to highlight a couple of things in this survey, because I think it helps set the framework for why we even jumped into this project in the first place. So one of the key questions we wanted to know in Minnesota was, we have these testing recommendations. Are private well users actually testing their well water? And we were a little surprised to find out that based on the survey responses, less than 20% of the respondents had tested at anything similar to what our testing recommendations were. And when we asked people, well, what would get you to test your well water? What would prompt you? The most common response after saying that they noticed a change in their water quality, the taste, the color, the feel, was that if a doctor recommended that they get their water tested, they would test their well water. Okay, that makes sense. And then after that, it was if there's an infant or a young child in the home, 50% said they'd test their well water. Or if there's a well testing event in my community, 50% said they'd test their water. If there was a coupon or a discount on a well water test, 49% said they would test their well water. Then there were a few more options on the survey. And then all the way at the bottom were these last two responses. If a town official suggested I test my well water, or if a news article ran about testing well water, then I would test my well water. And I only included those because I know we as a public health agency, and maybe you've encountered this too, we tend to turn to those last two things first because they're easy to do. They're low-hanging fruit. And we should continue using those mechanisms, but those shouldn't be the only mechanisms that we're using for education and outreach. That's only reaching 1 in 5 people, according to this survey. Again, this is just setting some foundations, so we're going to keep moving along here. So we also wanted to find out, so these households, we knew they had elevated levels of arsenic. We wanted to know, did they do anything to reduce their exposure to arsenic? And the survey found that about 1 in 3 people didn't actually take any form of action to reduce their exposure to arsenic. And when we asked them why they didn't take action, the most common response was, well, they just weren't concerned about the arsenic level. They didn't have a level of risk perception that seemed accurate for the actual situation. And then 21% said they weren't sure what to do or who to contact, and you can see some of the other responses there. So this stood out to us that, okay, so people weren't actually concerned that arsenic was an issue, and the next common response was that they weren't really sure what to do. That seems like a prime time for public health agencies and partners to step in and try to move the needle on that situation a little bit. Well, accurate risk perception and behavior change is complex, and I think we actually just discussed that a little bit over lunch today. We could talk for weeks and probably the rest of our professional lives about all the different theories for behavior change, what's most effective, what's most accurate, how can we guarantee that we're going to get people to test their well water and treat it if necessary, or drill a new well, or whatever the issue may be. And this is just one model of behavior change that I turn to most commonly because it's one of the first ones that I learned. I'm not expecting we're going to walk out of here and we're going to memorize all of these different barriers to behavior change and all the things that need to align for behavior change. But this is simply to illustrate that we're talking about some complex issues. We've all been there. We've all set that goal of, losing those 5 pounds, running a marathon, and we've all fallen through with those goals too. And so just like it's difficult to adopt new life patterns or health practices in our own lives, we have to remember that adopting a new practice in terms of well testing or treatment may be a struggle to adopt as well. So I highlighted some of these boxes up here. I don't know if you can read them. I'm going to kind of squint and try to read a few. But some of the things that we talk about for needing to align in order for someone to adopt a new behavior is that people need to have a perceived sense of self-efficacy, that they themselves are able to adopt this behavior. They also need to be able to perceive that there's positive consequences for adopting a behavior, such as testing your well water, and then that there are negative consequences if you don't test your well water. People need reminders that they have this new goal, they have this new practice they're going to do. There needs to be perceived severity of like how sick can I really get if I don't test my well water and find out what's in there. Or perceived action efficacy, this idea that, well, testing my well water is a good way to find out my water quality, and knowing my water quality is an important step to protecting my own health. So you can see there's a lot of things that are at play here. And so when we're thinking about this, looking at our survey results, there's another question that really stood out to us. When we asked people, where do you look to manage the safety, your well safety and your water quality? We were kind of thinking maybe Minnesota Department of Health would be at the top of the list. Well, actually, no, we knew that might not be the case. A lot of people did list us, but we kind of threw that out because we're sending this survey out. That seems like a biased response. So once you take out Minnesota Department of Health, wishful, you actually find out the most common response was a water testing laboratory. Now it does make a lot of sense because they're the person who's giving you your result. The natural question when you get your lab report is, oh, what does this mean and what should I do? However, as an agency in Minnesota anyway, we weren't working super closely with water testing laboratories. And I guess I'm just curious, I know we have some labs here today. Can you just raise your hands? So we've got quite a few. Okay, thank you. So water testing laboratories it was very obvious to us at this point, it's like we need to start working with laboratories quite a bit more if we're going to try to reach private well users, because private well users are already looking to water testing laboratories. The second most common responses, you can kind of read down the list. We have general internet searches, local and county government websites or offices, well drilling companies, and absolutely, we know well drilling companies are a critical partner in this. Today's presentation, we're focusing on labs because this was a kind of a new endeavor for us, and we have other projects that are focusing on some of these other partners that I'm happy to tell you about afterward if anyone wants to chat about it. So then when we were thinking through this, it was now thinking about the question, okay, so we also know we have all these different barriers to someone adopting a new behavior. So how can we work with laboratories so that laboratories can be part of that message that goes to private well users and can be part of the mechanism to reduce some of those barriers to adopting a new behavior of testing well water on a regular basis and treating well water if necessary. So now that we've laid some foundation, I just want to add one more thing. This project I'm going to talk about is one piece of a much, much larger puzzle. I know that laboratories fulfill a lot of different roles in a lot of different people's lives. This is just like one tiny piece that I'm going to see how it resonates, I guess. And then with that also, like laboratories are one small piece of the group of messengers that have access to private well users. So again, just remembering that this is a small piece of a much larger and much more complex puzzle. So again, we looked at these survey results. We're like, great, this looks like we need to work with laboratories. But what we hadn't done yet at this point was actually talk with labs. That's pretty important. So our student worker, Sam, she was great. She spoke with 27 out of 30 accredited laboratories in Minnesota to get their perspectives on the issue. She wanted to find out, do you get questions a lot of the time from private well users? What type of questions do you get? Do you feel that you have the materials or the information you need to answer those questions? Are there ways that we as a health agency can help support you in your interactions with private well users? And some of the main themes that came out through these 27 interviews was that the laboratories are absolutely on board to help promote private well testing. What would be helpful is if they had a clear idea of who they should be connecting private well users with at the health department. They wanted help identifying some of the resources that they could refer their customers to, and they wanted resources to help answer some of the frequently asked questions they get. So at that point, we decided, okay, those are some asks that we can actually do something about. And we decided to start working on something that we'll call a toolkit, because I don't really know what else to call it. And so we started that conversation. Right about then, I think Steve and I were at, was it NEHA last year? And we realized we were both kind of thinking along the same lines for a similar project. And he had already started talking with the Association of Public Health Laboratories as well about this project. So we decided this is a great opportunity to partner and focus on a project that, yes, we wanted to do in Minnesota, but more importantly, this can be something that is expanded beyond Minnesota as well. So then we started working on this toolkit. And the general aim was that we wanted to design a tool for laboratories to access if they wanted to expand their communications about information private well users are looking for. So the idea was three main things. We wanted to provide private well users with the information they need to protect their health. We wanted to build customer trust for the laboratories, which in theory should lead to increased business for the laboratories as well. So to develop this toolkit, like I mentioned, we started with those conversations with 27 water testing laboratories in Minnesota. And then we reviewed what types of materials laboratories are already using, both in Minnesota and beyond. And I know that the private well class had pulled together some of the lab reports and different resources that our laboratories are using across the nation. And we looked through a lot of the documents that are out there, how people are putting information on the web. And then we compiled some themes there and applied communication science and behavior change theory to come up with a few recommendations for laboratories. And then in this process, we worked with the Association of Public Health Laboratories and their Environmental Health Laboratories work group. And there were a handful of labs in that work group that reviewed the toolkit, and then a laboratory in Minnesota also reviewed the toolkit and the recommendations just to make sure we were suggesting things that were reasonable and feasible for labs to incorporate into their daily practices. So what actually came out of all of this? The toolkit, it has about, well, we're going to talk about 9 recommendations, I think. In the end, it ended up being 11 recommendations. And each of these recommendations, we walk through, why are we recommending this as a practice to adopt? What are some ways to adopt this practice? And what could this look like if it were in action? The toolkit will also include an example social media posts and pictures and stuff that folks can use if they like. And it includes an appendix of resources that we'd recommend connecting to if you want to provide more information for customers. It provides some tools about plain language and how to write in plain language and provide information in a simpler format. And then it also provides some guidance on if you're considering translating materials. And something I want to emphasize is that this toolkit is meant to be kind of a menu of options. Maybe some of the recommendations are feasible for certain labs, and maybe they are not for others. But it's simply a menu of options. You can kind of pick and choose whatever makes the most sense for you. I also encourage you, even if you're not a lab, take a look at this, because a lot of this stuff is kind of general enough that we could all incorporate some aspect of it into our communication with private well users. So there are 3 main themes that if people look through the toolkit and they walk away with nothing else, I hope they can at least walk away with these 3 things. The first one is collaboration is key. We should always collaborate to promote well testing and treatment if necessary. No single entity can reach every private well user. There are just too many of them, and it's a very disparate group. So collaboration is a key way to reach private well users. And then the second kind of, I guess, takeaway is this idea that none of us really have to reinvent the wheel. And I think this conference is a great example of this. There is so much expertise and so many existing resources already available for private well users or questions that people have already answered or explored. It's a matter of just making those connections. Don't feel like you always have to recreate the wheel. And then the last one is just when in doubt, just try to keep stuff as simple as possible. Why make it circuitous if it can just be a straight line? So we're going to just talk about a few of the recommendations here. So the first recommendation that I'll talk about, I guess, it's a different order in the toolkit. And these are pretty simple things. Just making sure that your well testing information on your web page or your outreach materials in general is easy to find. So we looked at a lot of different web pages, and some of them were really nice and clear, like this example up here where there's a clear tab for private well info, and some you really had to dig or you had to call the lab to find out if they even accept samples. And I guess I just want to put a disclaimer up here. You'll notice that these are all example labs. The examples are inspired by real web pages. We had some issues about whether the health department was comfortable posting real web pages for fears of looking like we're endorsing a company. So we didn't do that. So just keeping it simple, making sure there's a clear tab or easy way for private well users to find their information. Our second recommendation was to just connect your customers with information about contaminants. And this is partially inspired by that survey result that 50% of the people who didn't do anything to reduce their exposure to arsenic was they just simply were not worried about the contaminant. And so the more information and the more accurate information we can provide people and make that accessible and digestible to them, the more likely a person may be to actually take action to reduce their exposure to different contaminants and help develop an accurate risk perception. And this can be pretty simple. The web pages probably already exist. The content exists. It's simply just linking your customer to those web pages. The third recommendation is providing well testing or well test kit bundles. And this idea is inspired by, we've had a presentation that's talked about whether well testing should be a part of property transfers. For some places, it is a part of property transfers. What if a person goes to your website and there's a testing bundle that says, property transfer, testing bundle, selling a house, you'll need to test your well water for these things. And there are some labs that are already doing this, and it's a really great example that it's one less thing for your customer to think about. Or in Minnesota, for example, we recommend that people test every year for coliform bacteria. So make it clear up front, this is your annual test, coliform bacteria. You should do it every year. Just click on it, you can order it right then and there. The fourth recommendation was just that simple idea of reminding your customers that you need to test your well water. And reminders can come in all shapes and sizes now. We have social media to work with, we have email, postcards, letters, newspaper ads, radio ads, television ads, and the list goes on. And I had all these up here, and I wasn't sure. I had a few different ways I thought I could organize them, and at one point I wanted to go from cheapest to do to most expensive, but ultimately I landed on the ones that are on the top 2/3 in the kind of white background. These are all good ways to reach people that maybe who are not currently customers, so you can put that broad message out there and try to bring in more business. And that bottom row, the gray row, is good if you're trying to remind people who are existing customers that this is an option for you. Then our fifth recommendation is simply provide a discount or a coupon for water tests. 47% of the respondents in our survey said they'd be more likely to test their well water if there was a discount or a coupon that they could use. This is just, it's incentivizing customers to come in. The example appears maybe a little more dramatic than you would choose to go for, but it would be eye-catching, I'm just saying. Our sixth recommendation is provide local pickup and drop-off spots for people to get their well test kits and return them. And I will say there are several labs that are already doing this, and it's wonderful, and they've gotten a lot of really great business through it, and I know it takes a little collaboration to get it set up, but it really does help private well users. In Minnesota, for example, I mean, we are geographically a large state, and we have private well users in every county of the 87 counties in the state. But we only have 30 laboratories that are accredited to accept samples from private well users. So in some instances, you may live in a county where there isn't another laboratory for, you know, several counties and a few hundred miles away. Well, it's not particularly practical that you're going to drive all the way to that laboratory, pick up the test kit, go back home, collect your sample, and then return the test kit and the sample in that time frame that you need to have it back to the lab too. So a few labs have started providing local drop-off and pick-up sites, or pick-up and drop-off sites. And it's been something as simple as at the local library to have a refrigerator set up there. People can come in, they can pick up a box with, it's usually like coliform and nitrate sample bottles, and then they can bring them back to the library. They have posted at the library the times that the lab is going to come by on, you know, Thursday morning by 10 a.m. Your sample has to be here in order for it to be picked up. And then they process a sample and mail out the results. And again, the labs who have started doing this have always had at least one sample at each of their pickup spots when they've gone to pick up the samples. And then the other idea, the seventh recommendation we have is just partner to host well testing clinics or partner to provide well test kits at existing events. It could be county fairs or other outreach events that are already happening in the community, but just check in with the local health department, or maybe it's your soil and water conservation district or another entity to see if there would be a possibility of bringing test kits out. Maybe you can send someone from the lab to go as well. And again, this is inspired by 50% of the people said the way that they would prefer to pick up a test kit is if they had a local spot where they could go pick up the test kit and bring back their sample. And then our final recommendation, while it sounds so simple, it does take a lot of work, and I recognize that. I work in communications a lot of the time, so I know that plain language is a challenge and it's difficult to do, and I know as laboratories as well, you have specific standards you have to uphold with EPA or whoever you're accredited by. So there are certain things you have to list on those laboratory reports and other documents that you provide to your customers. However, I do encourage, and this is true for anyone, in your communications with private well users, just try to make it as simple to understand as possible. And the toolkit includes quite a few things that you can consider when you're looking through written materials especially, but it can be something as simple, maybe on your lab report, consider adopting a few different symbols or color coding so it's easy for someone to take a quick look at that and say, oh, it looks like everything turned out okay in this instance. Or if there are issues, maybe that can be in red or another color, or having a certain symbol. Like I just pulled some, I think they're wingdings in Word. So we have check marks, then we have X's or smiley faces and frowny faces, thumbs up, thumbs down. These are fairly universal symbols, so people should be able to scan their document and know pretty quickly whether there's something they should be concerned about or not. And if you have questions about those, I'm happy to supply some suggestions or ideas. I'm always happy to work on that. And so with that, I'm going to close out and open it up for questions. I do have a one-pager that goes over these recommendations as well. We will, in the next week, have the actual toolkit and accompanying tools posted on our webpage at this website up here. You'll just have to scroll to, there's a point that it will call out accredited laboratories. We just weren't quite able to get to it this week. But I think with that, we have a couple minutes for questions.
Yes, we do. Pop the questions up here. There's 3 or 4. Great job, by the way. Let's give Frieda a hand. And I'll also say that we were involved, and so was APHL, but Minnesota did all the heavy lifting for this, so it's really their project. So we appreciate being involved. So how can we identify and reach doctors directly? It's a big outreach need.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So I guess, first of all, if anyone has figured out this first question, let's please talk. I'd be happy to discuss this a little more beyond right now, too, but that has been one of our big initiatives that we've also been working on, is trying to work with medical providers more directly. We haven't found the perfect solution yet, but I can share kind of what our outreach plan has been, and that's been a combination of reaching out to professional organizations and journals that medical practitioners are looking toward, and doing direct emails and letters. Again, I wouldn't call it the silver bullet or the exact way to do it, but I'd be happy to share more detail about that outreach plan and how that's been working if whoever asked that wants to find me after.
Great. So this is a lab, clearly. We're including our water quality system assessments, a report with a due date, saying your next report's due or scheduled for, along with graphs of their water quality changes. Are you aware of others trying this?
No, I'm not.
Idea.
And that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And if you'd be willing to share what that looks like, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
It would be great if there are other labs doing that. Thank you.
Have you gotten any pushback? Because I know you did mention increased business as part of the lab driving your campaign.
Yeah, so today is kind of the official launch of this toolkit. So as of yet, not yet, but that is something that could become an issue. So I mean, we are very intentional that we want to make sure, like first and foremost, the concept is that we want private well users to have the information they need to make educated decisions and take appropriate action. And we want to help laboratories build their customer service and build that good base of trust with their client. And then as that side result could be increased business. Because, I mean, it is tricky. I mean, we're asking for laboratories to put in some additional work for something that's probably not a particularly lucrative part of your business, as much as I would love to say that it would be. So we're hoping that that's just like a little bit of a pull or a piece of inspiration to adopt some of the practices.
I'd also say that labs, if that's where everybody's going, if labs develop those capabilities and can answer those questions, that's just a benefit to us all. Yeah.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah. Can anyone get the toolkit?
Yes. Once it's posted on the website, which should be any day. If you need it before then, just send me an email. I'm happy to send it to you. But yes, it's open to anyone who wants to download. It'll be a PDF document, and there'll be a PowerPoint for the social media posts.
And lastly, are you aware of any official partnerships between water well industry and regulators with medical associations boards to increase awareness about water quality testing?
Official partnerships, no, I am not specifically aware of any of those. There are some partnerships we are pursuing, but it's very informal at this point. So again, if anyone does know any of that, I would love if you could share that, and I can try to share it out to the group as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.